Hi, I'm Doug Smith, and welcome to Portsmouth This Week, the voice of Portsmouth Town Hall. This is the 11 May 2012 edition. And our guest today is Madeline Pinsack, who is the Registrar of Voters for Portsmouth. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're the Registrar of Voters for the town of Portsmouth.
Correct.
What exactly does that mean, and what are your responsibilities?
Okay, well, if I may, I'd like to begin with explaining how the position comes to be and so forth. In Portsmouth, according to our town charter and Rhode Island general election laws, every city and town has to appoint a board of canvassers, which consists of 3 members. And those members are appointed by a list of applications that the town council review and then appoint the members to the specific board. They serve for a period of 6 years. Their responsibilities are basically, they are my supervisors. I report to them. They oversee all the expenditures that go on in the department, any of the certifications that need to be done for nomination papers or mail ballot applications, things of that sort. They also review my budget, and they approve that before I submit it to the town administrator. Out of that, they have to appoint a registrar of voters, which is basically like an office manager that oversees the office because they're not on the premises full-time. So I oversee the whole department by hiring temporary help for the department when it's needed during the time of the elections. We register, we're responsible for registering people to vote, maintaining the voter list, whether it's address changes or party changes. We coordinate the setting up of polling sites before the elections. I'm responsible for hiring the election workers to work during that time. And we set up the polls for the election workers before election day. I also work in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office and the Board of Elections, so I have to be familiar with election laws as well, because we have an election calendar and guide deadlines that we have to deal with on a daily basis. Sure. So that's basically, we do redistricting, which we're going to be doing this year. We have National Change of Address program that the state does a mailing to update the voters' record and get back to us, so that goes on during the course of the year as well. So it's always fairly busy in the office, especially during election time, sure, where we do a lot of mail ballots. And mail balloting is done for people that are shut-ins, students away at college, military personnel, or anyone that just can't get to the polling sites.
And how do they apply for one of those?
They can either do them online at the Secretary of State's website. They have blank application forms that have to be filled out and signed. They submit those to my office. I generate the information in our data system, and the Secretary of State mails them the ballot, and then the return envelope and so forth would go back to the Board of Elections. That gets mailed directly to them. Okay,
so to kind of recap, the canvassing authority is, there are 3 people that are appointed by the town council?
That's correct.
And they essentially hire you, or you work for them as the,
yes,
as the Registrar of Voters for
yes,
Portsmouth?
That's correct. Yep.
According to the website, we have about 13,000 registered voters in Portsmouth. How many of these voted in the last, say, general election?
Okay, in the general election in 2010, okay, we had about 7,500 voters, which was about 58%. Now, the highest numbers that we've had is in the 2004 and 2008 presidential elections. We had, in the 2004 election, we had approximately 9,400 voters. We had 73%. And in 2008, we had close to 10,000 voters, and we had almost 80% of the population that voted. Portsmouth is very politically conscious, I find, and I find that we always have very high numbers, even higher most of the times than the state does. So even statewide, like in the past presidential preference primary, statewide it was only 3%, and we had almost 6%. So
sounds like a pretty good turnout then.
It
really.
Does, yeah.
I'm sure people would like to improve that even more, particularly with the general election coming up, and we'll talk about that and the dates in a second. Of these voters, how are they categorized by parties, say Democrat, Republican, and unaffiliated? How would you break
Well,
those
currently
down?
we have 13,127 voters as of yesterday. And they're broken down by Democrats, we have at least 3,500. Republicans, we have about 2,400. And the unaffiliated, we have up to 7,200.
Okay.
So it's mostly...
Is that an increase in unaffiliated?
It is.
And has that happened over the last couple of years?
It has over the last several years. We find that most of the people today want to become unaffiliated because they're voting more for the person more so than the party. You still have the people that are straight party people, you know, and will always vote that way. But
Sure.
we find over the years that the people tend to look at the candidates themselves, and they want to vote mostly for the person and the party. So.
Okay, the next general election is very important. It's a presidential election.
Yes.
And what are some of the key dates that people need to be aware of?
Okay. Well, we have the primaries that will take place September 11th, and the final date to register to vote, that's only for people that are not currently registered, okay, will be August 12th. And that happens to fall this year on a Sunday. And my office is open between 8:30 and 4 p.m.
On Sunday?
On Sunday.
Okay.
And for the general election in November, it's the same way. It falls, the general election will be November 6th. The final date to register to vote is October 7th, and that also falls on a Sunday with the same hours, 8:30 until 4 p.m.
Okay, and that's to register. So
That's
what do
correct.
people need to bring down, or how do they go about registering if they've never voted before?
Well, they've passed the voter ID law this year, so that's required for every election. And it can be a photo ID, like a driver's license, or a military ID, or a passport, or something of that nature. Or it can also be, for this year anyway, it can be a utility bill that shows their name and address,
Okay.
or anything of that nature. They can register at the office on those dates that I've given, or they can register online at the Secretary of State's website.
Oh, they can?
They can.
Okay.
There is a blank registration form. The only thing is they would have to print it and sign it because I need the original signature sent to my office.
Okay, so they go to the website, download the form, fill it out, and then
Correct.
bring it into you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, or they can mail it.
Or mail it to,
They can
sure.
mail it.
Okay.
And then they can also go to the Board of Elections location in Providence, and they can fill out a form there as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that verifies both their identity and their address, where they live?
Yes.
Okay. Do we need to get more people out? Do we need any volunteers to help get out the vote, do you think? Or are we pretty good shape in Portsmouth? It sounds like we're doing reasonably
I think
well.
in Portsmouth they're doing very well compared to some other communities, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that we are.
Okay, good. One of the things that I know you're going to be working on in the next several weeks is redistricting, and perhaps we can have you on again later on to maybe discuss how that's going.
Okay.
But can you give us a general idea? Essentially, are the number of representatives for Portsmouth still going to be the same?
They will. We'll still have for the 4 representative districts. It's just that the lines are shifting northward, so it might change the population shift and the polling locations a little bit.
Yeah.
We're still in the process of working on that at the moment, but it needs to be done before the end of June because we have our declaration of candidacy period for the candidates during that time. So that will need to be done before that, but we will be sending a mailing out to everyone to notify them of their new either representative district and polling location.
Okay. For some reason, either I always lose that or something because I always find it confusing. I have to go online and do some research before I can figure out where to go. If somebody is confused, let's say after the redistricting, because that's going to take place before the general election vote.
And before the primary.
And before the primary.
Yeah.
If somebody is confused, what's the easiest way for people to find out? Can they just call you?
They can just call our office. Yeah, I have some temporary staff with me right now working on this, so they're more than welcome to call in anytime between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they can call us, and we'll be glad to give them the new information regarding their polling location and district.
Okay, that's great. Do you know if that information will be available on the town website as well?
It should be, yeah, it should be after we've completed it. Yep.
What about technology? I mean, we've got all kind of new technology out there now. How has that helped you or hurt you? Does it make your job more difficult because people are contacting you all the time, or has it made it
No,
easier?
it's made it simpler. We've in 2004 we received a new database, a new system with the Secretary of State's assistance because all the monies that they had put in for that, and it's connected the 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island, whereas before we were all separate. We all had our own data system, so this has made it much easier for us to communicate with other cities and towns and look at other information throughout the state. So it has been
Now,
very helpful
is that
for me.
connected up with the town halls system?
It is. It's on, and there's a main server too in Providence, but we also have it on the server at the town hall as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you all? I know most of your positions that you have around polls and things like that are essentially paid positions for a day or two. I guess you don't use volunteers. You don't need volunteers, particularly in your office or for your function.
We've always. We find that it's difficult sometimes. We try to get sometimes like high school students, or we try to get people that would like to, but people like to get paid, so they.
Oh, sure.
So they, usually they'll apply to be an election worker, but like I said, those are all paid positions, whether they're the moderator, the clerk, or the supervisors that check the people in. They're all paid positions. You find that across the state. It's the same way in every city and town.
Okay. Now, you must spend some time on the Secretary of State website, I guess, looking up things every once in a while?
Yes.
That's where I go, I know, to try to find out things about this. I guess the last question that I had really was, how is voter ID working out? And I think that's working out reasonably well.
That's worked out very well for us this past election, because in the past, if people come into the polling site and didn't have any identification on them, they've had to do a provisional, what we call a provisional ballot, and then submit it to our office for us to look into to make sure that they were registered to vote and they are the people that they say they are by checking their signature and so forth. So now with the voter ID, it's clarified that, and everyone came prepared. And we had handed out information. The Secretary of State had done some ID cards prior to that.
There's so many forms of ID available that people
Right.
usually have that I wouldn't think it'd be a problem anyway.
Right. No, it worked out very well, and you find that statewide it did for the other cities and towns. We had no provisionals in Portsmouth at all for this election, and many cities and towns didn't as well.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the people of Portsmouth here before we?
Well, just to get out and vote in September and November. It's very important. Okay. It's a very important year.
One thing that I thought was interesting in the use of technology is that people can do a lot of things online now without having to actually come into the office. I wonder, does that apply, like people that have homes in Florida, for example, for half the year and up here? Can they use the internet to do the same thing, or how does this work? What are the guidelines for where you vote?
Well, what happens? If a resident is living 6 months in Florida and 6 months in Rhode Island, okay, they have to choose either state. They can't be registered in both. They can only be registered in one state. So if they choose to be registered in Rhode Island and say they're in Florida during that time of the election, we can mail them a mail ballot. Okay, but they can't, like I said, they can't be registered in both states.
Okay, now the state you're registered to vote in, I guess, is the state you pay taxes in, right?
No.
No.
No,
really?
that isn't. No, they can still pay taxes here, but they can be registered in Florida, even if they own property. So.
Okay, how about vice versa? Can they go to Florida and not pay taxes and still vote up here? I guess they can, right?
No, well, no, I'm sure if they have property in Florida, they would have to pay their taxes in Florida, but they could be registered to vote here.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I found it very easy to walk into your office and, talk to you across the counter there, and I encourage anybody that's got further questions for Madeline to just go down there and say hello to her, and I'm sure she'd be able to answer any questions you have.
Okay.
Madeline, thank you much for joining us, and I hope we'll see you again perhaps as we get the redistricting underway.
I'd love to. Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
2012, Rhode Island's new voter ID law will go into effect. You're going to need to bring with you identification when you go to the polls to vote. A Rhode Island driver's license, a Rhode Island ID, a student ID, or any state or federal government issued identification card with a photo on it is sufficient to vote. If you do not possess one of those forms of identification, we will provide one to you for free for voting purposes only. For details, please call us at 222-2340.
Okay, our next guest today is John King, who's the Director of the Emergency Management Agency in Portsmouth. Welcome, John.
Welcome. Thank you.
How long have you been the EMA Director in Portsmouth?
I was appointed to the Director's position in October of last year, and before that I served as the Deputy Director, and before that for several years as the leader of the Communications Unit, Emergency Communications.
Okay, so you have had previous experience doing this kind of stuff.
Yes, and it's all with the town of Portsmouth.
Okay, great. Just out of curiosity, how are we organized in Portsmouth for an emergency, and who's in charge? I guess if you want to start at the top and work down, that would be fine.
Yeah, Portsmouth operates within the context of a much larger framework known as the National Response Framework. The National Response Framework defines how we as a nation respond to incidents from the largest national catastrophe down to the smallest local incident. It defines roles and responsibilities at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And the overarching principle of the National Response Framework is that all emergencies are local, and that incidents are handled at the lowest possible level, at the local level. It is never the intention of the top agencies to intercede or take control of an emergency situation. They're there to provide resources. If an agency or a jurisdiction is overwhelmed or needs resources, they go to the next level. In our case, that's the state level. If the state need resources, they can go then to the federal level. Now, since you have all these players in the game, they need a common operating paradigm, and that is the National Incident Management System. The National Incident Management System is the blueprint for how response is actually handled. Let me give you a for instance. We have a urban search and rescue team in the state of Rhode Island. In fact, we have members from Portsmouth on that team. They might get called out to Missouri to a tornado situation, for instance. A team from Texas might be on the same scene. How do they interoperate? You may have seen in the disaster TV footage the symbols on the sides of buildings, the big red X's in the boxes. That's a standard marking system, standardized across the country through the National Incident Management System, that those responders all talk the same language. That symbol means something to those responders, whether it was a team in Texas or the Rhode Island team. They talk the same language. On the local level, we also participate in the National Incident Management System. All of our first responders, all of our police, fire, EMS, our department heads, school department head, Portsmouth Water Department, all have NIMS training. So we all talk the language of the National Incident Management System, so we can all operate in conjunction with our partners at the state level or interagency or intertown, or even our federal partners. We all talk the same language. Now, the National Response Framework defines specific duties and responsibilities at the local level. This answers your question about who's in charge. The chief executive officer of a jurisdiction is responsible for the safety and welfare of the citizens. In our case, that's the president of the town council. According to the town charter, the chief executive of the town of Portsmouth is the president of the town council. The role of the emergency manager in the town is to provide guidance to the chief executive officer and ensure a coordinated response between the response agencies. Your first responder agencies are your police department, fire department, emergency medical services, Department of Public Works, and non-governmental agencies such as the Red Cross. They all speak the language of NIMS and all operate under the National Response Framework paradigm. So who's in charge is the chief executive officer. Now, in an actual emergency situation, that person may not be the best equipped to deal with an emergency response. In that case, and this is what happened during Hurricane Irene, a joint command is established. It's called a unified command. It's part of the incident command system, which is also part of the National Incident Management System. A joint command is set up between the department heads of the police, fire, and public works. They are in charge of the emergency response.
Okay, so where do you all set up a headquarters or an emergency operating center somewhere?
That's exactly what it's called, the Emergency Operations Center, and that's located in the Portsmouth Fire Station. We have a large space upstairs in the station that's equipped with redundant communications between us and the State Emergency Operations Center, between our EOC and our local shelter, between other area EOCs and our units in the field, our police and fire, public works units in the field.
So that's where presumably, and typically in Portsmouth, we're talking about a hurricane or a winter storm, perhaps, or something like that. So you would be operating out of the Emergency Operations Center.
That's correct.
Presumably, another example, I guess. Let's say that the CEO of the town, the president of the council, is either out of area or feels that somebody else is more qualified to do this. Can he appoint somebody to?
He can delegate authority, yes.
That authority?
He can, and actually did during Hurricane Irene, delegated the authority of managing the incident to the Unified Command.
Okay, and who was in charge of the unified command at that point?
That would be the department heads, the fire chief, the police chief, and
Okay,
DPW.
but a unified command means one person in command. Who is that?
No, unified command is different than single command. In a single command scenario, you have a single incident commander.
Okay.
Unified command, it's those three the leaders of those three departments make decisions jointly on the operational response.
Okay, now, so the CEO of the town could then delegate it to the unified command? So you have
Yes.
three people essentially in charge?
Yes.
Are you one of those three?
No, emergency management never, it's safe to say never, assumes command authority. Emergency management coordinates the response and provides resources. In Portsmouth, we provide a common operating picture. All the facts that are known are filtered into the EOC, so we can provide a common operating picture to all the units in the field and to the government, local government, and the state if they request that.
Yeah.
If we have resource requests that have to go to state, we go up to the state level with our resource requests. We're a coordination agency rather than a command and control agency.
Okay, so how would people contact you or the system, say prior to a hurricane, to find out what's going on, to find out what people are doing?
Prior to a hurricane or a predictable
Right.
event, we would be posting things on the town website that people can call. The Portsmouth Fire Department is probably the best number to call, the Portsmouth Fire Department's business number, because it's answered 724. And we are also establishing, through our town administrator, is very proactive in social media outreach. We'll be developing a social media outreach in conjunction with the town of Portsmouth. We don't operate in a vacuum. EMA operates as part of the town.
So you are looking into some kind of social media to get the word
Our
out?
administrator is extremely proactive in that regard. He has to iron out some things with our IT provider, but he is working on that.
Yeah, one of the, of course, the Hurricane Irene was, in many ways, it was a worst best case, because the worst case was it happened on a weekend, so it was difficult for people to call. They didn't really know. They probably should have just called the fire department, but people didn't necessarily know that. And the other thing was, we're lucky we didn't get hit by the thing, because it moved north and it was just far enough to not make it too bad here. But of course, the next thing happened is electricity went down for 26 hours in my case anyway. And the real issue was people had the feeling that at the people level, I realize all these organizations and things are established probably in the wake of terrorism and things like that for those kinds of incidents. It just seemed like there wasn't a lot going down to people, and that's why I think you're looking at social media is encouraging to me.
We held an after-action review after Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Irene. And that, again, is part of the National Incident Management System, the after-action review. And that was plainly obvious to all of us that we did a poor job of communications with the town people. And we have tried to remediate those things, and one of those is going to be the social media outreach. Another is a reverse 911 emergency notification system where we can push out telephone calls and text messages. I have submitted that in this year's budget request to the council, and I'm hoping that will be approved in this year's budget. We'll have that in place by June.
Yeah, that would help a lot, I think. The other thing was, I know in the aftermath of Evelyn, we were promised some kind of emergency management pamphlet that was going to be, initially was going to be put in everybody's tax bills, which explains probably basically what you said about how you're organized and how all this stuff works, and maybe some key telephone numbers. Can we still expect that to come out sometime at some point?
That pamphlet has been prepared. It has not gone to the printers. It will need to be reviewed again by Mr. Klimm, the administrator. That pamphlet was prepared shortly before he came on board.
Right.
And he will need to review that, and there may be some changes in the sheltering aspect, emergency sheltering aspect, that we'll know more about next week. So that pamphlet is almost there, but it's on hold at the moment.
Okay. But something hopefully we can try to expect before hurricane season hits.
It's my expectation that we'll have it out well before hurricane season.
What exactly is the town administrator's function then in an emergency? Is he part of that unified team? Unified command, or no?
Technically, the way the laws are written, it's the chief executive officer of the town.
Okay.
One of my recommendations to the council and to the administrator is that we consider, through the Charter Commission, revising the charter to move that responsibility back to the town administrator. That would give us continuity.
Yeah.
It would probably be a better fit for that role.
How is it done in other towns? I mean, do you have any idea?
Yes, the
It's
mayor,
done that way?
the mayor or administrator of the town is that if you look at anyone's home rule charter, you'll see that the president of the town council is the ceremonial head of government.
Right.
The chief executive is
He's usually the administrator or
the mayor
town
or the
manager.
yes. We're unusual in Portsmouth, but
Well, speaking of emergency shelter, I just wondered, where is the town's designated emergency shelter right now?
our town's designated emergency shelter is the Portsmouth Middle School. And that is, it was open during Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Irene. And I think we were open for about a total of 48 hours during that event.
And do you know if the Red Cross needs volunteers for?
Oh, the Red Cross always needs volunteers.
Well, they always do, but I mean, for that
volunteerism
specific function.
is at an all-time low. I should back up and probably explain how the shelter is run, how the shelter is
Please.
operated. Client care is provided by the Red Cross. Red Cross comes in and manages the shelter as far as the client side goes. Operationally, the town provides a police detail, a fire and EMS detail. Portsmouth EMA provides a communications detail so that we have ironclad communications between that facility and the EOC. But other than that, the Red Cross does all the client care, the client side things. They are so strapped for volunteers that they realize they can't provide that service to 39 cities and towns in the state of Rhode Island. They're in the process right now of developing a regional shelter plan. That's why I say that Portsmouth Middle School is at the moment our shelter in a widespread emergency. That may change with the Red Cross's regional shelter plan. Mr. Klimm and myself have a meeting with the Lieutenant Governor Wednesday of next week to discuss this issue. It may be that we shelter somewhere else, but in a local emergency that affects only Portsmouth, the Portsmouth Middle School is our shelter.
Okay. We're almost out of time, John, and I'd like to try to have you on again later on as we get into this thing and as the budget gets worked out. I'd like to end by, what do you consider to be your most critical need right now in the EMA? How can we help?
My most critical need right now would be to get that reverse 911 system in place.
Okay.
And how we can help as citizen volunteers, perhaps we can go into that in the next session, because I could talk for half an hour on that one.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to that. We're out of time. Doug Smith, again, thank you all for watching Portsmouth This Week, and we'll see you next time.
In 2012, Rhode Island's new voter ID law will go into effect. You're going to need to bring with you identification when you go to the polls to vote. A Rhode Island driver's license, a Rhode Island ID, a student ID, or any state or federal government issued identification card with a photo on it is sufficient to vote. If you do not possess one of those forms of identification, we will provide one to you for free for voting purposes only. For details, please call us at 222-2340.